During 1971, during the Liberation War, I was about 14 to 15 years of age and studying at the class 10 of Holy Cross School. My links to the war was basically the fact that I am a victim of the war, in the sense that my father, Dr. Jyotirmoy Guha Thakurta, was killed on the very first night of the operation of the Pakistan Army, which they called Operation Searchlight. So on the 25th night, close to about midnight, my mother, I, and my father, who were both living on the campus, just across from Jagannath Hall, where my father was the provost. It was a dormitory where my father was a provost. And very close to that, we were living across the street. And my father was correcting exam scripts. And suddenly we heard lots of firing and gunfire all around. Usually there were some gunfire because, you know, after the 7th of March, the declaration of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who said it would be a civil disobedient movement. So the students were preparing for war. So sometimes they would do marching at night. We saw lots of Pakistani army in a convoy of jeeps, which just stopped outside our gate. So they broke the chain of the gate and they rushed in. And they went to each of the flats. We were on the ground floor and banged the doors. We tried to open the door, but the door would not open. So they came around behind the backyard, which was a garden. And then they banged on our kitchen door, and we had a household help who opened the door, and she was thrown aside. And the three army, one looked like a officer and two soldiers walked in with guns in their hand and in a Pakistan Army uniform. My mother went forward and asked them, "What do you want?" And they said, "We've come to take the professor. Is he here?" And she said, "Where will you take him?" They did not answer. They brushed her aside and went on to my father, who was standing there. And they asked my father, "Are you the professor?" My father said, "Yes." And then they said, "We will take you." My father asked why, but they did not answer why. They just took him by the hand and went away. We had the idea they were arresting my father because they didn't ask him any other thing. So we thought that as soon as they leave, we will call up people to know where he's being held, and then we will go through the process. That was our idea. But on seeing, when the soldiers left, on seeing that, my mother told the family that don't resist. If you resist, they will shoot you. So I see they also took my husband. And but at that moment, I rushed to call up people. But as soon as I took the phone lines were cut, I realized. So I came back to tell my mother that the phone lines have been cut. And soon we heard 4 dreadful, loud noises of bullets. And as we went to the front door to see what happened, we saw Munir Zaman and his 3 son and two nephews, all lying on the pool of blood. So they were shot immediately. They were really, some were spot dead, some were groaning. So as we were hurrying, trying to give them water, one of the women in that family called my mother and said that, look, your husband is also being shot. He's lying outside. He's calling your name. We were thunderstruck. I mean, we did not expect this. So they gave, the two shots had hit him, one in the nape of his neck and the other in the waist, which actually paralyzed him downwards. So he could not raise himself up again. As we gave him water, then several people came to help us carry him to the house. We couldn't take him to the medical hospital then and there because there was a curfew all around and the soldiers were still patrolling the streets. And we know that he would be shot again if they saw him. So we took them inside our house, but we had to take him over the dead bodies of the professor and the three sons that they were killed on our landing. And once in the house, he was put on a mattress on the floor, and then for that whole night we couldn't take him to the hospital. The next day and the next night also we couldn't take him. So the whole of the 25th night went like this, that my mother gave whatever first aid she could, but he was conscious but slowly getting weak. The doctors saw him and they told my mother at that time that he was critically injured, so they couldn't do anything about it, but just making him comfortable. So in that way we stayed on in the hospital. My mother stayed with him, as I too, and on the 30th of March in the morning he breathed his last.
We can start it from 1970. Because after the election, Awami League owned the majority. Except the Pakistanis and their intelligence service, the Bengalis knew that they are going to win, and they won, both in the provincial assembly and in the central assembly. We didn't think, let me tell you frankly, that this sort of thing can happen. We thought, because the election was on universal suffrage for the first time in Pakistan, power will be peacefully transferred. But from the 1st January 71, there was an apprehension, because the things the central government is saying or the army junta was not conducive to the Bengali people. And it became clear on the January they are not going to transfer the power. And as you know, from January to March, there was negotiation, counter negotiation and other things. And from March, after the 7th March, or we will say from the 1st March, the army was shooting people. There were small bits of riots here and there. And after the 7th March speech by Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, it was transparent clearly that we are not going to get the power. And Bangabandhu and Awami League leaders tried to, what should I say, the posture was they are doing discussion for democratic reason. But you see, East Pakistan, the then East Pakistan, is a far away from the central government. And from the ancient times, it was an hinterland. And at that time also, it was an hinterland. We didn't have that much world view, and we didn't know what genocide is. We have read it. We have seen films of Holocaust. But we didn't think that could happen in the modern state in 70s. And we didn't face any war. You see, for 1,000 years there were war, you see. Say, war of Plassey. It was in the field. two armies, as you know, you have seen in the film also, the medieval people, they are fighting in a field. So the common people, it didn't affect them. So we didn't know anything about war. Europeans knew because they fought war for 1,000 years, but we didn't know. I mean, they're common people. So there's two things, there's a war and it's the genocide. We are not ready for it. We thought, yes, there will be strike, there will be shooting, there will be counter, attack, something like that, but not on that scale. But it all started on the 25th March. Then we understood what war is, and we understood what genocide is. And the rest is history. I was in Dhaka, I was a student of the university, living in Mirpur. At that time, it was not densely populated area, and it was a suburb of Dhaka. We didn't know, because Dhaka at that time was a small city still, at that time it was a small city. We didn't know what was going to happen. But on the 25th March, till evening, we were in the city, but there was an apprehension that something is going to happen. But because I went to the suburb, and there was no modern technologies at this time, so we had a transistor radio and a land telephone. On the 25th March, we met our friends and we were roaming around the city. By afternoon, we are going to our home. But there was an apprehension that something could happen, but we didn't know what is going to happen. And I used to live with my uncle in Mirpur, that is Pallavi, a place called Pallavi. At that time, it was just have few buildings or something like that. You may call it a suburb of Dhaka. At that time, we had only a land telephone and a transistor to listen to. Around 12 o'clock, one of my uncle's student, who used to stay near the secretariat in the center of Dhaka, so he was very excited, and so he was telling that the tanks are roaming in the city, there are fires, they are shooting, but he didn't know anything. And from India, Calcutta particularly, we got the news that according to them, the civil war has started in East Pakistan, and they're playing our national anthem, My Golden Bengal. But still we didn't know, because we are afraid of the non-Bengalis, we call them Biharis. They also used to live in Mirpur. And from 27th onwards, we saw they are surrounding our area, Bengali-speaking areas, and they started shooting people and looting houses. And on the 28th, maybe, some non-Bengalis, they took us, the Bengali families, 4 or 5 Bengali families, to his house, locked them inside a room. And when the looters came, he came forward with his gun and said, there is no Bengali, you should leave. They didn't believe, he said no. And they left, but we thought we are not, if we stay here, we'll be butchered, because I saw they're chasing a man, Bengali doctor, and he fell on the ground. They had sharpened rods, they were sticking it in his eyes, killed him. Then they left the body in a manhole. So these things were happening.
And on the night of the 25th December, which is the Black Day or the Genocide Day, I mean, whatever you can describe, it happened at the midnight. And we can hear, because it is very far away, the center of the city is far away from where I was living. But I could, somebody woke me up, because we were doing literally a 24 hours vigil, so that there is no trouble in that area, on that residential area. So we were in a shift. So my shift was, I went to sleep, taking a break. So during that break, somebody woke me up and said, do you hear the sound? So already cannons and the machine guns, we can hear, because the dead night, it was silent, and we can see the flare from the rooftop. And we understood what has happened. I was very young, but I could understand. Then we discussed, it is too late, we cannot stay in the house. We have to move. The next morning, I moved my mother to a safer place. So that's how we were saved. The following day, after we shifted my mother, it was already the Urdu speaking, those who are supported Pakistan. And incidentally, my younger brother is now immigrant in Australia, Nasim Samad. He hoisted the independence flag. So it became a sort of like a, everybody could see that flag, and he put it up in a bamboo pole as tall as you can see from a very far away place. So obviously that house was a target, and the first attack was my mother's house. It was attacked, it was vandalized, it was of course I'm not sure about looting, and they put it on fire because of anger. This is more like anger. Why did you hoist that independence flag? This is seditious. But we could see that my house is on flame. We were in a safe place because the gentleman who had given us shelter, he speaks the language very fluently, and he looks like a Pakistani, incidentally. So he could help us to be saved. On 27th, we couldn't move. The curfew was still there. On the 28th, there was a break for a few hours. So that was when we left the place and we went to my mother's father's house.
One of the reasons why there is a Bangladesh today is the fact that troops from West Pakistan, Punjabis, savagely terrorized the Bengali population of East Pakistan. Perhaps 1 million people died.
Our area was very remote area in Manikganj. The people, both Bengali Muslim and Bengali Hindu, we are living peacefully. And two groups of freedom fighters were sheltered our village. And as a remote area, Pakistani army could not move those areas because they had a danger to be attacked by the freedom fighter. And this was a peaceful area actually, and we did not attacked by the army up to 14 December 1971. But my many relatives who lived around the Manikganj town, they were very dangerous. One of my relatives and my sister-in-law were taken by the army, and they are collaborators in Rajakar name. They taken them, and his relative, their clothes shop, and they were sleeping in clothes shop, and they were taken, and they were shot near Kaliganga river. But my sister-in-law, he was very lucky, jumped into the river and she escaped. But my another relative, she was killed. And in Manikganj town, and our neighboring village in October 19, those where mostly or almost 100% people are a minority, and three villages are minority from people. People live there, and these villages were attacked by the Pakistani army, and their collaborators, Rajakar, Al-Badur, etc. And they burned all the villages, and when they entered into the village, most of the people fled from the village, and they took shelter on the rice field, paddy field, and where around 2 feet or 3 feet water, standing water, and they, including children and women, men, all take one person were killed, but almost all villages, all households were, and all houses were destroyed and burned with gunpowder. And then these villages, three villages, were around 3 kilometers distance from our village, and we are standing showing this scene, and we are also very feared because we attacked. And some days after, the armies were attacked by the freedom fighter.
So I was there almost the whole night under a tree. They were actually And I was asked to, then I was told that, look, we are looking for somebody who has to go back to Dhaka, because we need people, young people, because mostly those who are coming here, who are joining the guerrillas, they do not, they either they speak Bangla, they don't speak English, even they speak, understand English, they cannot speak Urdu. So we need somebody who can fluently speak bilingual so that we can interact. I said, am I fighting the war? Yes, but you are in the will be intelligence, because we need somebody who look innocent. Innocently, you will be in the street of Dhaka, and so I had to come back. And it was a month of April, March, the crackdown, April, and it was May, middle of May. I'm not sure about the exact date. I came back to Dhaka with a small team, in fact, with a small team, and our job was in the capital was very simple. Number one, to identify shelter for those who are coming for guerrilla operation. So I have to find a shelter, a safe shelter. Number two, they need little money. Money means to buy food, that's it. Or have to arrange food for them. So that was also my job. And the third was organize an escape vehicle. It can be motorbike, it can be anything, but you have to organize, because they need to escape the city once the operation is done. I mean, you cannot stay after the operation. You have to leave the city, because it is not safe, because somebody can identify somebody. So, and before doing that, I was supposed to do a recce. I mean, recce means going to the place and trying to identify whether this is a nice place, which I mean, if you have an operation, they want to do a blast in this campus, for example, then you have to identify the one door, exit and entry. So it has to be two different doors. So you enter with one door or one gate, but you have to get out of the other door. So you cannot come out from the same way, because there will be security. Okay. So this was what I was doing for the next few months. So obviously I know most of the operations which has happened in the Dhaka were all young boys, mostly from the village. To be very, very frank, they came from the village with a village background. They don't know anything about the city, and so we were like a tour guide, trying to help them to where to go, and again have to organize a vehicle so that they can be immediately transported out of the city limit or a safer place, so then they can escape. The most important was, it is not to kill people, not like what is happening in Afghanistan or any other, in Syria and Iraq. So there was less casualty. It was to boost the morale. Number one, to boost the morale of the people. Say whoever is supporter of the independent Bangladesh, to boost the morale that yes, the guerrillas are active. Number one. Number two is to demoralize the Pakistanis, and third is to let the Pakistan military know that you are in the wrong place at the wrong time.
ক্যাপ্টেন করিমের সাথে আমি বিভিন্ন জায়গায় যুদ্ধে অংশগ্রহণ করছি। তার মধ্যে মে মাসে সবচেয়ে বড় অপারেশন ছিল বাংলাদেশকে ব্ল্যাক আউট করা। সেটা আমার বাড়ির কাছেই মদনাঘাট বিদ্যুৎ কেন্দ্র, ওইটাকে ডেস্ট্রয় করা, এবং বড় যে লাইন যেটা সমগ্র বাংলাদেশে যে কাপ্তাই থেকে বিদ্যুৎ সঞ্চালন হয় সেই লাইনটাকে ডেস্ট্রয় করা, এবং আমরা সেটা করে বাংলাদেশকে ব্ল্যাক আউট করে দিতে পেরেছিলাম। মে মাসের ডেটটা আমার এই মুহূর্তে মনে নাই, বাট ব্ল্যাক আউট করে ক্যাপ্টেন করিমের নেতৃত্বে আমরা ব্ল্যাক আউট করে দিতে পেরেছিলাম। এবং আমরা যেহেতু ফ্রন্ট ফাইটার কোম্পানি, আমাদের ওই ছোটো ছোটো জায়গা ফাইট করার আমাদের কোনো ইয়ে ছিল না। আমাদের নির্দেশ ছিল ডাইরেক্ট অ্যাটাক অ্যান্ড বিগ অ্যাটাক, বড় অ্যাটাকগুলো আমরা করব। তো আমাদের এইভাবেই আমাদের প্ল্যানগুলো হতো এবং রেকিগুলো হতো। আমরা বিভিন্ন জায়গায় আক্রমণ করেছি, কিন্তু আমরা দেখেছি যে আমাদের এই ক্যাম্পটার জন্য এবং আমাদের থানার জন্য ভেরি ডেঞ্জারাস একটা স্টেশন, যেটা আমি আগেও বলছিলাম, মাদম্যহাট, যে ওই মাদম্যহাটটাই ছিল ডেঞ্জারাস। সেখানে রাজাকাররা থাকতো বেশি, আর মেনলি রাজাকারের একটা মূল ঘাঁটি ছিল। তো আমাদের একটা সিদ্ধান্ত হলো আমরা ওই ক্যাম্পটা উড়িয়ে দেব, এবং অ্যাকর্ডিংলি আমাদের রেখি সব কিছু ঠিক করে আমরা ওই ক্যাম্পটা আক্রমণ করলাম লাস্ট নাইটে। আক্রমণ করতে গিয়ে আমরা সেখানে ব্যর্থ হলাম। সেখানে ব্যর্থ হয়েছি বলতে, ওখানে যে আগের দিন সামরিক পাকিস্তানি আর্মি আসছে সেটা আমরা জানতাম না। আক্রমণের মধ্যে প্রতি আক্রমণটা ছিল আমাদের খুব বিশাল। আমাদের ওখানে প্রায় 7 জন আমাদের সেন্ট্রাল গভর্নমেন্টের চাকরিচ্যুত মান্নান, আমাদের খুব ভালো ছেলে ছিল পঙ্কজ বড়ুয়া, এরকম 7 জন আমরা ওখানে হারাই আসছি। এবং আমরা ব্যাক করে ক্যাম্পে চলে আসি। এরপর ক্যাম্পে ফিরে আসার পর আমরা আবার রেস্ট নিয়ে এবং আমাদের যে হারানোর বেদনা, মানসিকভাবে বিপর্যস্ত হওয়া, আবার অর্গানাইজ হয়ে কীভাবে এগিয়ে যাব চিন্তা করছি। এইভাবে সিদ্ধান্ত হলো 2 দিন কোনো অপারেশন হবে না, রেস্টে থাকবো। 3 দিনের দিন আমাদের ক্যাম্প আক্রান্ত হয়। আমরা বুঝতে পারি নাই যে, আমি ছোটোখাটো ঘটনাগুলো বলি নাই, শুধু মেইন ঘটনা। তখন ক্যাম্প আক্রমণ হওয়ার পর আমরা সবাই পালিয়ে যাই উইথ আর্মস। কিন্তু দুর্ভাগ্যবশত আমাদের খুব কম বয়সের একটা ছেলে আমাদের সাথে ছিল, খুব ভালো ছিল। তার তার জ্বর হয়েছিল। জ্বরের জন্য সেই আর যেতে পারে নাই। তাকে ব্যানার দিয়ে কুচিয়ে হত্যা করে।
Actually, my family had to hide out from the locality, and they had to flee out from their house, the village, and they had to take shelter in a safe place. So I know it only. My family is from. They actually live in Rangamati, a very remote place of the country. Okay. As you know that the indigenous peoples used to live in hilly area. So we live in hilly area, mountainous area in Rangamati, Chittagong Hill Tracts, Bangladesh. Actually, I think that after the liberation war, you know that after 1971, Bangladesh became independent. Okay, so the freedom fighters who fought against the Pakistani military, they fought for equality, social justice, and human dignity. So I don't think so that after the liberations war, after the 15 years of the liberations, the indigenous peoples of this country have not gotten these things. I think that those things are still yet to be resolved.
This is Nirmal Rosario, President, Bangladesh Christian Association, and at the same time I'm acting President of Bangladesh Hindu Buddhist Christian Unity Council. So we are in Bangladesh. We are also around 10 lakhs people Christian. During our liberation war, that was around 3 lakhs Christian people. 1971 war, almost 1,700 Christians, they took part directly in liberation war as being freedom fighters. Then 2 priests were been killed, 1 nun were been killed, and some of the freedom fighters they had been sacrificed their life. And what was the cause to kill the priest and the nuns? Because they were helping the refugees and the displaced people during the war. Because many people, Muslims, Christians, and Hindus and Buddhists, they became the refugees during the time, because they left their home and they took shelter in the church compound. In many church compound they took shelter, and those priests, Father Evans and another father and sisters, they were taking care of those refugees and the displaced people. And that is why the Pak army, the Pakistani army, killed that 2 priests and 1 nun. And in some in some Christian villages were being fired and arsened and vandalized. It is in Kaligons and some other places, and that was very shocking. And was news that still today we remember those priests and nuns and freedom fighters who left there, who gave their lives. That was from Christian community side. Actually, still we are asking for the justice. The genocide happened, yet there had not been any trial. So we want a trial and justice and the attention of the international community.
But secondly, is most important is to erase their identity, their culture, and Pakistan Army deliberately did part by part. Secondly, so they wanted to erase the culture of this country. They want to erase the language of this country. That nobody is going to speak Bangla. So they made sure that nobody is speaking Bangla. Whoever spoke Bangla, they were shot and killed. So this is another issue. So it is not only identifying themselves as the pro-independence supporter, or had been, or my brother has gone to the war, so I'm a accomplice, or maybe I'm also a supporter. So they killed me, or they picked up and wanted to know who else has gone to the war from your family. So that is another issue. So they have gone through all the stages. In 9 months, they could organize even to erase the culture, the tradition, and rape was a weapon of war.
Nobody knows the actual figure of how many people really died during this conflict, and nobody knows the actual figure of how many women suffered mass rape. And nobody knows the actual figure of how many people were killed. And no government since independence has made a serious effort to do a census of how many people we lost, how many people perished during the war, how many were lost in combat, how many were lost in non-combat situations, how many women were raped. Well, that was a bit more difficult because rape is so stigmatized that very difficult for any woman to say, I was raped. And only those women who actually suffered severe injuries as a result of being raped maybe multiple times and needed medical attention, only they came into light. But many women never reported the rape. So we don't really know how many women were raped. There is an estimated figure of 200,000, which is considered the official figure. We don't know if it was more or whether it was less. We really don't know. Same with the number of people who perished. There was no real attempt to come to a kind of authentic figure. And to me, this is the beginning of, how should I put it, a kind of, if you even, I don't know if I should use the word disrespect, a kind of disrespect towards the people who fought and the people who lost their lives, that we did not bother to count them. And I think in any country which has lost its best citizens during an independence war, must honor them. But you cannot honor them if you don't know who they are. And it was not something difficult. Every village could have made their own list, and these names could have been preserved in a memorial. And people, children especially, who didn't know what happened to their fathers or brothers or uncles or mothers, would have a place to go and see, okay, here is my father's name, or here is my mother's name. But that was never done. And 50 years now, and we continue to have big speeches about independence. We continue to brag about what's happened, but we don't do the serious work to honor those who really sacrificed. Yeah, I was only 17, but actually that pain has stayed with me. But I didn't know how to vent that or what to do with that pain. In 2011, a member of Nari Pokho shared with us that her mother, and I want to mention her by name because she is someone who should be given national honor. Name is Shafina Lohani, and in a small town called Shirajganj, which is sort of north of Dhaka, she looked after for all these years. She passed away 2 years ago, but for all these years she looked after more than 21 Biranganas. Now, Biranganas are the women who had suffered rape at the hands of the Pakistan Army soldiers or their collaborators, and they were given the title Birangana on 22nd December in 1971, which is 6 days after the end of the war. And the title was given with the intention that these women would not suffer from disrespect, because in our culture, rape is very stigmatized and the entire blame is on the victim rather than on the perpetrator. And it is seen as a loss of honor for the victim, for her family, for her village, for her nation. So instead of being seen as a war crime, she is seen as a victim of something that she had no control over. And so when the title was given, it was given with very good intention, that people will respect her, because the word Birangana means war heroine, that she will be treated as a heroine instead of it, as she is being treated as a fallen woman, in many places they've even called her a dirty woman, as a bad woman.
Women were made into sex slaves. Thousands of women were made into sex slaves. That we hear about the Yazidi in Iraq, Syria, Yazidi. Almost they were made into sex slaves. Thousands of women had been freed by the Mukti Bahini after the war. So now you may appreciate the government after 50 years have identified those. Identified means they have described that women are also war veterans. I mean, because they had to sacrifice. I mean, they sacrifice at a different term. Not necessarily you have to take a weapon and fight, or not. So those women has been as described as war veterans, and they are also getting a monthly stipend, which is fair enough to survive. I mean, this is done very recently, last few years of this regime called Sheikh Hasina's regime.
So naturally it gave us a different meaning, so we had to take up a different identity. I used to go to a convent, and the sisters of my school were very sympathetic towards us. They had sheltered many other people like us, and so once they said that they will accommodate my mother in a hospital which they owned, which was Holy Family Hospital, and under the name of Barbara Gomez, so that no one will know that she's a Hindu. I was taken similarly to an orphanage, and then we suddenly saw soldiers and every policemen carrying arms and going to surrender their arms, and we saw a person in a bike shouting "Joy Bangla" and carrying the flag of Bangladesh there. I said, "How come you are so brave to do this?" He says, "Don't you know, they have surrendered, the Pakistan army has surrendered. There is a flag in the radio station." So we went up on the 6th floor of the roof, and we saw the flag that was very near of the radio station, and we then realized that the country has become independent.
Bangladesh will remain a state of Bengalis, not of Muslims, not of Hindus.